Hey guys, stay tuned to the end of the episode where I'm going to read one of the iTunes reviews for Fascination Street podcast. If you've left one, it might be yours, and if you haven't, do it, and maybe it will be in the future. I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with Sandahl Taylor. Sandahl is Mrs. Pennsylvania America 2018. She is also Mrs. Germany World 2020, competing for the title of Mrs. World. In this episode, we talk about what led her into pageantry. We talk about a very tragic event that happened to her father, which altered the course of both his life and the lives of her family. We talk about some of the struggles that she went through, being a young mother and a survivor of domestic abuse. And of course, we talk about some of the work she does with various charities, including haircuts for the homeless and veterans, and the American Heart Association. And finally, we talk about her upcoming Mrs. World pageant in Las Vegas in December, and she explains why her work with the American Heart Association is so important to her. So enjoy, folks. This is my conversation with Mrs. Pennsylvania America 2018 and Mrs. Germany World 2020. Sandahl Taylor.
Yeah, talk to me, yeah.
Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast, Sandahl Taylor. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fabulous. Thank you so much for having me on today.
It is 100% my pleasure. So what we're going to do is we're going to get to know you, sort of where you grew up, and then all the way up to now, as much as we can fit in. So
that sounds great. I'm excited.
Oh, me too. So tell me about where you were born and raised. Where'd you grow up?
So I actually was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but my family is originally from Germany. So I have a very heavy German-American family. And so I grew up with all different kinds of cultures and backgrounds. And now leading up, I'm actually now participating as my heritage in a new pageant. So I'm actually now representing Germany in an upcoming pageant that I'm competing in.
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get to that. So growing up in Pittsburgh, I got to assume that you are a diehard Steelers fan?
Born and raised in a terrible town, and I will die in a terrible town. Absolutely. Black and gold all the way. You know it.
So does that mean that you're a huge fan of that television drama, This Is Us?
Actually, I don't get to watch TV too often, and when I do, it's normally cartoons. You know that I have two very young children.
Yes.
7 and 11 are the ages. So if we watch TV, most of the time it's pretty much cartoons and news. Just to keep me in a little bit of the loop of what's going on. I tend to read the news, so when I get to work, because I always get to work early, and I give myself that time to read the news then. So most of the time it's cartoons. So I have actually not watched This Is Us yet. So
gotcha.
Hopefully nobody's mad at me for saying that.
Well, they'll get over it. I only bring it up because it takes place in Pittsburgh, and
yes, that is true.
It sort of centers around how much of Pittsburgh Steelers fans the whole family was. At least at the beginning of the show, it did.
No, yes, that is very true.
So I did hear that there's an interesting story behind your name. Do you want to share that?
Absolutely. So for those of you who have not yet heard, my name is Sandahl. So that's Sandahl. And my name actually comes from a movie called Conan the Barbarian. It's the very first one with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So if you've ever seen it, you know who I'm talking about. There is a lady in that movie. Her name is Sandahl Bergman. She's a famous actress. She was on Broadway. She was in Red Sonja. She was in a lot of different things. She's gorgeous and blonde and tall and thin. And that's actually who I was named after. And a few years ago, I actually got to meet her at Comic-Con. Really, really cool. And I got some autographed pictures with her. It's probably one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me. And so I finally got to meet who I was named after.
That is awesome. And What was your name going to be if you were a boy?
So that question I have never actually asked to my parents because I don't think I would want to know. I do know that my dad wanted to name me Galadriel or Gladriella from Lord of the Rings, and my mom kind of won on that, and I ended up with the name Sandahl. So that's pretty cool. I never really asked them what I was going to be named if I was a boy, so maybe I'll ask them when I get off the call.
Well, I think Galadriel is a good enough answer. Good Lord. Well, I am glad that you didn't get named Galadriel because it's already hard enough for people to say your name correctly, especially in a theater full of pageantry. So I can't imagine that would have been any easier with the other name.
Yes, I normally send it out phonetically, and then I normally always get asked, it's normally the first question I get asked is, how do you actually say your first name?
God, well, I mean, I feel like oh, no, yeah, I did that. So what do your parents do, or what did your parents do?
Okay, so my dad is actually currently paralyzed. He's paralyzed on the left-hand side, and we can go more into depth with that. And my mom is actually a nurse. She's been a nurse for a really long time, and she's currently still practicing home health care as a nurse, and she's been doing that pretty much my whole life.
My wife and her entire family are all nurses, so I'm wildly familiar with all the nursing stuff. So what did your dad do before he became paralyzed?
So my dad was actually a manager for several different businesses before he became paralyzed. The last one that he actually worked with, he was actually working on trying to become a part owner of, and he managed a car wash for a really long time. And we actually kind of grew up around that industry, and he also was a hobbyist photographer. So I like to talk about that as well because he actually had the capability to photograph Cindy Crawford at one point, which was really cool, in a workshop that he did when he was studying photography. So that's pretty cool. And that's actually how I kind of got into modeling, was just growing up with him, kind of looking around and working in the photography industry. But right before he actually became paralyzed, like I mentioned, he was working at a car wash, working on trying to become a part owner of it.
Gotcha. That whole photography aspect was, I asked that so that we could lead into pageantry. So your dad is kind of doing that, and so that sort of, I would assume, kind of opened your eyes that, that is maybe a possibility, that, some people have sort of limited options based on where they grow up or their financial means or, just things like that. So did seeing all of that sort of open up the idea that, maybe that's something that you could pursue?
It did a little bit, but what really got me into pageantry was my very first director. So for some people who don't know pageantry has mostly, depending on where you live, 3 or 4 levels. So there's an international level, which that competes all over the world. There's a national level, which is typically that nation. So for each of us, it's the United States right now. And then there's a state level and a local level. So that would be my local director. She reached out to me knowing that I do a lot of advocacy work and actually presented pageantry to me. And I actually was like kind of woken up to the idea of becoming a pageant, title holder and a queen, because I really saw what pageantry could do for my advocacy work and to get my message out there about what I wanted to pursue and what I wanted to give back to the community. And it really actually kind of changed my whole life because I absolutely love pageantry now. I recommend it to almost every person. If you've never competed in a pageant, I think everybody should compete in a pageant because it teaches you a lot about yourself, a lot about what you're actually looking for in life, love, kids, no kids, what you want to do with your life, where do you want to go? And it also, like I mentioned, it helps you with your passion. So whatever your passion might be, it helps you kind of figure out, well, what do you want to do? And that's kind of what drew me into pageantry in the first place.
So the advocacy for causes came before the interest in pageantry?
Yes, I was actually doing advocacy work way before I did pageantry. I've been doing free haircuts for the homeless and veterans for over 10 years now. That's something that I will never stop doing unless I physically am not able to. And even then, so I'll probably try to figure out some way to continue to do it. And I also am a volunteer with the American Heart Association, and I've been doing that since 2005, since my dad became paralyzed, because he became paralyzed from a heart attack and stroke.
So I know that it's probably painful, but can you tell us about that day?
Actually, yes. I can vividly remember it. I will probably never forget the day. as long as I live. I went to work that morning. I woke my dad up. I actually took my dad's van to work because my car was broken that day. And when I woke him up, everything was fine. He spoke to me. He actually gave me a little bit of money for gas because he didn't fill up his tank the night before. And I went about my day. I was at work cutting hair. I was actually working at Supercuts at the time, which is a local hair cutting chain if you're not from Pittsburgh or if you don't have one near you. And my mom came into my workplace. Now, at the time, my mom lived over an hour away, so it was quite a surprise to see her at work. And it was even more of a surprise to see her and hear her say the words, "You need to leave right now. Your father's in the hospital. He just had a stroke, and he can't move." When I went to the hospital, I couldn't even see my dad for over 4 hours because they were working extensively on him. I couldn't even tell you the amount of doctors that I saw in and out of his room that day. And I literally just sat there and probably cried for about 4 hours straight until they finally let me see him. The first time I ever actually saw him, he had part of his head removed, his actual skull, because there was so much swelling that they couldn't actually reduce it without removing part of his skull. They had put in a stent for him, and he had already undergone 2 surgeries to try to reduce that swelling in his head. And so it was pretty serious. And so at that point, they knew that there was going to be some permanent damage to his body, but they weren't sure of how much yet because he had obviously yet to try to do rehab. So it was a pretty intense day.
I am so sorry. What was the cause of the stroke? Do they know?
A heart attack. He went into a massive heart attack. And the heart attack is what actually led him to have the stroke. He had the heart attack in his sleep. And then when he had the heart attack, he actually rolled over out of the bed. He actually fell out of the bed onto his left-hand side and lost complete oxygen and blood flow to the left-hand side, which is what ended up causing the stroke.
Gotcha. Is this neck down or waist down?
It's his complete left-hand side. So from his left side of his face all the way down his body.
Gotcha. After he made as much of a recovery as he was able to, is that when you started your advocacy for other programs and things of that nature?
No. So I was actually doing the haircuts before I started working for the American Heart Association. And then I really started to work a lot more with the American Heart Association after that happened. So for that aspect, I did start a lot more. I started becoming way more involved. I actually became a national advocate for the American Heart Association. I am actually in the process of becoming a Empowerment to Serve ambassador. So I'm looking to actually start the program called Empowered to Serve here in Pittsburgh because there isn't one currently. And that program actually has several lessons. So it's about 6 to 12 lessons that you can actually teach anybody on ways to become heart healthy. So I'm looking to actually start that program here in Pittsburgh because we don't have one quite yet.
Interesting. So is that event that happened to your father and your family, is that what precipitated your service-oriented mindset? Service to others?
I really don't feel like that was the only event. I do feel like it was the start of it, though. After that event, actually, we became homeless. I was 17 years old when my dad had a heart attack. I literally just graduated high school the month he had a heart attack. So I didn't know a lot about mortgages and how to take care of the mortgage and how to transfer over the bills. I mean, for crying out loud, I just realized that I didn't lose my dad. So that was a lot to handle at 17, 18 years old because it was me and my brother at the time. There was just 2 of us in the house. So we ended up losing my family home that I grew up in and lived in for 18 years. And that was really hard. So I actually became homeless for a little bit because I really didn't know where else to go. And, I actually reached out to my mom because there was just we just had a little bit of a difference at that time before my dad had a heart attack and stroke. And we didn't quite see eye to eye on a lot of things because I was a lot younger. And now, getting older and kind of realizing I moved with her, which I moved over an hour away. And that might not seem very far, but when you're that young and when you literally just graduated high school, you didn't know, you postponed your plans on going to college because this event just happened to you. I didn't know anybody when I moved. It was really, really hard. So I feel like going through that aspect and then moving forward, once I did move, I met a boy.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors. Let's get back into it.
I met a boy, fell in love, had a baby, the whole 9 yards. And I actually realized that I was in an abusive relationship, having my son. I was a victim of domestic violence, survivor of domestic violence. I like to say that now. And I chose to leave him. And at the time, he lived very close to my mom. So I chose to leave the whole vicinity, which left me homeless again. And like I said, I was able to stay with my mom, but I chose not to because it was very close. And I didn't know what he was going to do to me or my mom or, our dogs or anything. It was just a very bad situation. So I moved a lot. I stayed with different family and friends at the time until I could get myself on my feet. And going through that, in addition to my dad, it was kind of just this ripple effect that really made me realize that had I not had the assets I was given, I would not be where I am talking to you today. I would not be sitting here on this podcast talking to you today. I probably would have gone down a very different path. And that is what made me realize that these skills that I have to cut hair and these skills that I have to have a voice and to still be alive and still be breathing, God gave me those skills. God allowed me to have these skills, and God allowed me to still be here, that I need to carry them on. And if something as simple as a haircut can change somebody's life, I'm going to continue to do that. So that's kind of really what made it even more important, is going through all that myself.
That makes sense, and thank you for sharing that. Now, you said that you ended up leaving the boy and the area, out of preservation. What gave you the courage? And the reason I'm asking that is because I'm sure a lot of victims of domestic abuse can't find the courage to get themselves out of that situation. So where did you get that courage from?
I hate to refer to this like this, but it's the only language that I can think that would relate, and I refer to it as the last straw. Like I mentioned, there were signs and symptoms that I simply either didn't see or ignored or made excuses for. And again, it's a day that I'll never forget. I was sitting there with my son at the time, our son at the time, who was less than a year old. He was not even 6 months old at the time. And my friend was over. This was like the second time she had seen the baby, first or second time she had seen the baby. And I was holding him. I think I was feeding him at the time, but I can't remember exactly what I was doing. I just know I was holding the baby. And he ran down the stairs, and I was downstairs, he was upstairs, and started screaming about, he thought that I either threw away his drugs or put them in the toilet. And I had no idea what he was talking about because, like I said, I had suspicion, but I never actually heard him admit to it. And when he admitted to that and he thought that I did it, he physically assaulted me multiple times, to the point where I was in the hospital, actually, after that. And then, like I said, when he did physically assault me, I had the baby in my arms. So, again, I'm very thankful that my reaction was to give my child to the woman who was sitting there. And I literally just left. I don't know to this day if I can, I call it courage, but I don't know if that's the exact word. But I just knew at that moment that this person could have killed me and my child. And it sounds probably crazy to admit this, but me is one thing. That child who didn't have a life was something different. So I feel like I give the credit to having a child because it was this infant that didn't even have a chance at life, and he put that infant at risk. Now, he's since gone through rehab, so I like to mention that, and he is fully rehabilitated for a couple years now, and is back in, my son's life, and is doing great with my son, and they have a great relationship. So I do like to mention that. But it was really hard. It was a really hard path for me. So I feel like that was what made me leave, is my son.
Well, that does sound very hard, and I can't even begin to try to understand what you went through, and I'm so sorry. Thank you for letting us know that things seem to be on an uptick for your son's father and his relationship. I won't say that's a happy ending to the story, but it's definitely a more uplifting end of that part of the story. So thank you.
Absolutely. Some people can't say that it's a happy ending, and I'm happy for him because, like I said, whatever you believe in, that's a higher power that's given you that second opportunity to make that difference. And I'm sure he's very thankful for that as well.
Good. So when you first got asked to be in pageants, was it the Miss Allegheny County?
That was actually not my first pageant. My very first ever pageant was the Miss Pennsylvania American Beauty Pageant. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit not as known as the America system, so there's multiple different systems. And I actually represented as Mrs. Pittsburgh. So I was Mrs. Pittsburgh in my very first ever true pageant. And I say that because I had competed for years and years and years prior to this in different competitions, modeling. I did a lot of bikini competitions. I did a lot of, they call it runway competitions, so like power walking on stage. I competed a lot growing up and never won. This was my first true beauty pageant. And I actually won the interview award in that pageant. So I was really excited about that. And I was the first runner-up. And then I found the Mrs. America system, which is the system that I am working with currently. And I competed as Mrs. Allegheny County for 3 years in a row before I was able to actually obtain my dream of becoming Mrs. Pennsylvania. And I won that title in 2018.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What is the difference between the Miss and the Mrs.? I know that we all know what a Mrs. is, but there has to be, help me out here.
Okay, so there's actually a few divisions. Now, there's a Miss, which is MISS, which your typical pageants are, that is for someone who is typically single and under the age of 27, typically with no children. Now, our amazing organization, which is the Miss America organization, Mrs. America organization, they've designed a new category that was just new this year. It's called the Miss for America. And that is for anybody who was single or married and all the not married, single and or widowed or divorced. And the only requirement was that you had to be over 18, which is new. That's unfounded in pageantry. It's either you have to be unmarried and no kids or be married and have kids. There's really not too many systems in between. Now then, there's a Ms. division, which is MS. So I'm getting into the technicals now. Now that's for somebody who's typically over the age of 27 and unmarried, and typically you have either children or not children. So that's a little bit broader of a range, but not all pageant systems have that division. And then there's Mrs., which is MRS, which is for married women, typically over the age of 18.
Gotcha. So did you have to wait until you were married before you could enter one of those competitions?
I did have to wait until I was married to enter into one of those competitions, which that's why I competed in pageants so late. When I first was even modeling, like I mentioned, there wasn't a division out there for me because I was single. I was 19, obviously, when I had my child, because he's 11 now, and I wasn't married. There wasn't a lot of systems that had that Miss division, the MS division I was talking to you about earlier, or a Miss MISS division that allowed you to have children. It wasn't a thing then, and now it is, which is amazing. It's a kind of new wave in pageantry, so there's a lot of ways that you can represent at any age.
Well, congratulations on the 2018 Mrs. Pennsylvania. And I understand that you are, help me out here, the 2019 Mrs. Germany?
2020 Mrs. Germany World. That's okay.
Now, how does that work? How can you be Germany and Pennsylvania? Tell everybody.
Okay, so I actually crowned my Mrs. Pennsylvania successor. Her name is Rebecca West Hensinger. You can find her online. She's gorgeous. She's such a doll in 2019. So I'm actually no longer Mrs. Pennsylvania America. I am former Miss Pennsylvania America. And my current title is, like I mentioned, Mrs. Germany World 2020. And I was able to get that title because, like I mentioned before, and I kind of gave you a sneak peek, is I'm actually representing my heritage. So as I mentioned, I was able to trace my family all the way back to Cologne, Germany. With my dad's side, my my grandma's maiden name was Braun, which is very common in Germany. It's actually one of the most common surnames in Germany. And I was able to actually trace my ancestry all the way back to Cologne, which is where Braun actually was initially originated, the name.
Wow.
So it's pretty really cool. And like I mentioned, with growing up with a lot of German traditions and learning a lot about my heritage and where I came from, I was able to represent my heritage as Germany, since Germany did not have a pageant in their country.
They didn't? Really?
They did not, yes. I know, right?
Yeah, that seems so strange.
You would think that they would, which would be amazing. So hopefully that's on the horizons. That's actually on my bucket list of things to do, is to help, the organization create a pageant in Germany. And hopefully that's something I'll be able to do.
Nice. So besides beauty, what else is considered in crowning in these pageants?
Okay, so I like to mention that, yes, beauty is important, but it's not just about physical beauty. It's about inner beauty. I really, truly believe in the saying that you know when someone isn't pretty on the inside, and not just in like the terms of what we think is pretty. You know when somebody's just not a nice person. So the first category is interview, which is actually scored based off of your poise, your confidence, and how you actually speak to the judges. The second portion is swimsuits. So we do have a swimsuit division in the Mrs. category. It's typically a one-piece, but that's okay. I can rock it either way. And then you also have evening gown. So most of these are also scored with your poise and your presence on stage. So how do you walk on stage? How do you feel on stage? Are you portraying that confidence? Are you wearing a gown that you love? And that's typically how it's scored. Now, in my pageant, we also have an additional aspect of the pageant, and that is your national costume. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to be yet, but I can tell you that you're going to know it when you see it. It's something that you would almost iconically associate with Germany. I'm really excited about it, and it's actually from Germany, so it's a traditional German costume. I'm excited to say that. And so you have that aspect as well, but that aspect is actually not a part of the total judging. Once that happens, you get broken up into what they call a preliminary top 15. So the top women in those three categories get picked to be in top 15. At that point, those people compete again in the same categories and get narrowed down to a top typically 6. Now that can change depending on the number of the contestants. And those top 6 get asked a question on stage. And these questions can be anything, and there's not anything that's off limits. Most of the time you get a question like, well, why should I choose you to be Mrs. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so? But that's not always the case. And then those top 6, based off of their question, get narrowed down to top 3. And the top 3 get asked the same question or a little bit difference of a variation of why should I choose you to be Mrs. or Miss So-and-so. So that's kind of how it works.
Well, no spoilers, but I sure hope it's a dirndl.
It might be. You never know.
You never know. No spoilers.
No spoilers. They're just going to have to watch the live stream or come to Vegas to find out.
Oh, it's going to be in Vegas?
Yes, it's going to be at the Westgate Casino and Resort, which is beautiful, by the way, if you've never been there, and it's very affordable. Not just saying that because I've been there twice now, but it's really amazing, and the staff is it's to die for. You really feel like a celebrity there. It's going to be at the Westgate Casino in Las Vegas, and I'm leaving the day after Thanksgiving, but the finals are on December 6th.
Well, I don't know. I know that in acting you can't say good luck, so I'll just assume this is like that, and I hope you break both of your legs. How's that?
I love it. I love it.
So you didn't mention a talent portion. Does that mean there isn't one?
Yes. So in our division and in our system, there is no talent portion. But I do have a really cool talent that I don't know that many people can do if I were to have one. Do you want to know what it is?
I heard you in another interview where you said there is no talent portion, but I have one, and the interviewer did not ask what the talent was, and I almost broke my phone. So would you please tell me what your talent is?
Okay, so I actually play the steel pan, which is mostly commonly referred in America to the steel drum, which is actually incorrect. And I play a double tenor steel drum, which we refer to it as a double second. And I've been playing that ever since I was actually in middle school. Now, that's a kind of
Really?
really cool, yes, I know. It's a really kind of unique and cool talent because who else do you know from Pittsburgh that was born and raised that can play a steel pan, right? So I actually learned how to play it because we actually had a steel drum band in my middle school. And I ended up becoming, I know, it's really cool. If you look up, I went to Keystone Oaks High School. I don't know if they have one anymore, but when I went to high school, they had one, and I ended up becoming the vice president of it when I was in my senior year. It was really, really fun. It's probably my funnest adventure. And that teacher, who was Hank Monch, is actually the teacher who gave me the inspiration to become a teacher, which is really cool. So, yeah, I play the steel pan. Fun fact.
That is so crazy. I can't believe that other person didn't ask that. That's wildly fascinating. So thank you.
It's kind of cool. It's really cool.
Oh, it's not kind of cool.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors. Let's get back into it.
I like to mention, pun intended here, that I'm a green belt in budgeting. I think it's a hidden talent that I budget my checkbook down. Yes, I still use a checkbook to a penny every month because I'm so strict about what I do and my savings and my nesting and stuff. So I like to mention that too because it takes a lot to budget a whole family.
Yeah, and to do it correctly, yes, it does.
Yeah, and to make sure you're saving and doing everything that you need to do. So that's also a hidden talent that I like to mention because it's fun. And who doesn't want to learn how to budget?
Man, I tell you what, you could open up a museum. You got checkbook registers. You got steel pans. You're crazy.
I know. I know. People probably giggle whenever I say checkbook, but honestly, the easiest way to keep track of your finances is to write them down.
Well, that makes 100% sense. I mean, it's been going on since the beginning of writing, so it can't be all that bad. Every time I see a beauty pageant on TV, I turn to my wife and I ask her 2 questions, and so now I'm going to ask you those 2 questions, okay?
Okay.
How often in your life have you gone to a pool or a beach?
Do you want me to answer that? How often have I gone there? How often do I want to go there?
How often have you been around any body of water?
A lot. Probably over 10 times in my lifetime. We'll just go with that.
Probably over 10 times, yeah?
Yeah.
Of those 10 times, would you say maybe close to 10 were in some sort of a swim attire?
Yes.
And how many of those, would you say, were you wearing a swimsuit and high heels?
Again, if you were asking me to be honest, none.
So why do they do that? I'm assuming you wear high heels in the swimsuit competition?
Yes, you do. Okay, so there is a physical behind this and a safety issue. Okay, so first things first, you never want to walk on a stage typically with bare feet. Now, I give one exception to the rule, and that's for a dancer. Typically, right before a dance performance, the stage gets swept and brushed so that you make sure that your feet don't get hurt for lyrical dancers. So one thing first is for safety. Number 2, high heels actually elongate your legs and make you look taller than you are. So it's for the illusion to appear taller. And that's typically also why you see a nude or a clear heel, so that the leg actually continues in a stroke to make you appear taller than you normally are on stage.
Oh my gosh. Those were great answers. Thank you so much for imparting that wisdom. I had no idea. That wasn't even a real question, but you made it a real question with your real answer. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I'm sure there's a couple other reasons why that is too, but that's what I come to think of. So
I love it. So I know that you do some work for a few different organizations, and some of them you've mentioned already. Will you just hit one more time which organizations you advocate for and what you do for them?
Yes. So the biggest 2 are the American Heart Association. I'm a volunteer. I'm an advocate. I help locate people to CPR trainings. I am a national public speaker for them. I talk all the time about heart health and ways to become heart healthy. The second one is that I provide free haircuts to veterans, and I do that primarily through the Veterans Leadership Program, which is here in Pittsburgh, but they do have other things nationwide. And I am looking to actually start my own nonprofit, going to be called the Haircut Project, that will provide free haircuts to low-income, homeless shelters, first responders, and veterans, and that you should be looking for that in the next year. The other organizations that I work for are the Dress for Success program, Women's and Homeless Shelters, and the Victoria's Voice Foundation. The Victoria's Voice Foundation is the national sponsor and platform for the Mrs. America organization, which is part of the organization that I'm currently working with. So Mrs. America and Mrs. World are sister organizations, and Victoria's Voice is actually fighting the opioid epidemic through their unfortunately tragic loss of their daughter, Victoria, who passed away from an overdose. So I am working with that organization as well currently.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. I know that we sort of got a little bit of a late start, and I apologize.
No, that's okay. We were playing phone tag. I loved it.
We were. Can you tell everybody where they can find you on social medias?
Absolutely. So, again, you got to look for the spelling. It's Sandahl Taylor. If you type in Sandahl Taylor, trust me, no one else is going to pop up. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, pretty much you name it, you can find me. If you by chance can't find that, you could just type in Miss Germany World 2020 and it will probably link you to me, or Miss Pennsylvania America 2018 and it will link you to me. But you can find me on all 3 social medias under that name.
Thank you. And now finally, is there anything that I didn't ask you or we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about?
I did want to just kind of touch base a little bit on why I'm choosing to compete at Miss World, if that's okay with you.
That is great. Please hit me.
Okay, so my first reasoning is, of course, my platform. Heart health is the number one disease in the entire world. It's the number one cause of death in America and in Germany, with cardiac arrest being at the top typically. 1 out of 3 people are affected by heart disease every year. So we need to do something about that. The amazing thing is, recently, Pennsylvania actually became the 39th state to make CPR mandatory to be taught in high schools. Now, I like to mention that there is a way that you can opt out, so it's not forced. It's just required that they offer to teach it, which is fabulous. If everybody can at least learn hands-only CPR, you increase somebody's life chance by 40%. That's one of the main reasons why I decided to compete for Mrs. World. The second reason is because everywhere you look around the world, there is negativity. I want to be a light for positivity. One of the things that I always live by is a saying that goes like this: be a pineapple, stand tall, wear a crown, and be sweet on the inside. And that goes for men, women, and children. You are always wearing an invisible crown because someone in your life is looking up to you, whether that's a sister, a brother, an aunt, a cousin, a neighbor down the street. Somebody somewhere is looking up to you. So wear that crown and stand tall. You are the best person that you can be with the given circumstance. And remember to be kind. Kindness can empower change in our future. And I truly believe that kindness is the way to make change in the world. So being sweet on that inside allows you to project that positivity in a light that we can never imagine. And last but most certainly not least is to give that voice back to the voiceless. Like I mentioned to you before, I was lucky that not only my life wasn't taken from me, but that I got a second chance by meeting this amazing knight in camouflage armor as my husband to get out there and do what I do every day and love what I do. So surround yourself with those great people and be that light and be that voice for the people who cannot be that voice any longer.
I love that. Light a candle rather than curse the darkness. I love that.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
And they say it's only darkest just before the dawn.
They do say that. Now, Sandahl, I had a whole bunch of more questions, but we literally just ran out of time. I'm so sorry. But again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your busy day and making this thing happen and letting us all get to know you a little bit better on Fascination Street. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And save those questions because maybe later on when I'm done with competing with Miss World, I'd be loving to come back on.
That sounds like a great idea. I will hold on to these questions, and we will talk to you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Taylor. Mrs. Taylor. You have a great rest of your day, and remember, break both your legs.
Thank you so much. You too.
Bye-bye. This is an iTunes review for Fascination Street Podcast. This is a 5-star review from Gone Cold Podcast. It says, absolutely one of my favorites. First of all, Steve is a great interviewer. He's funny, guests warm up to him easily, and he asks the questions you or even a seasoned interviewer probably wouldn't have thought to ask. My favorite thing about Fascination Street is Steve's choice of guests. He interviews folks I had no idea I wanted to hear, and I go away from each and every episode learning something new or learning about an individual who I might not have ever thought to have taken it upon myself to explore. Top notch, no doubt. Thanks, Gone Cold Podcast. I'm also a fan of your show, and anybody who hasn't checked out Gone Cold Podcast, whether you like true crime or not, give Gone Cold Podcast a shot. It's my favorite true crime podcast. It focuses on unsolved murders throughout history all over Texas. That was a 5-star iTunes review for Fascination Street Podcast. Rate and review Fascination Street Podcast on iTunes, and maybe next week I'll read your review. As always, thanks for listening, Streetwalkers. And don't forget, follow the show on Twitter at FascinationSTPD, on Instagram at Fascination Street Pod. Follow the podcast page on Facebook at Fascination Street Podcast. And of course, you can always email me at fascinationstreetpod@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and rate us on iTunes. For the next 3 months, everybody who rates and reviews the show and sends a screenshot to fascinationstreetpod@gmail.com will get a free surprise gift mailed to them. Every single one of you. So do it. Thanks, Streetwalkers. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.